Hi, I'm Bob, and welcome to Bob's Movie Facts. In this video, we're going to talk about 10 mind-blowing facts about Star Trek III, The Search for Spock.
Nice of you to tell me in advance. Gentlemen, your work today has been outstanding. I intend to recommend you all for promotion in whatever fleet we end up serving. Best speed to Genesis.
A fast-paced, action-packed adventure worthy of the Star Trek franchise. An excellent follow-up to Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan that, along with Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, creates an incredible 3-film arc that's known as the Genesis Trilogy.
Admiral, we're losing precious time.
What course, please, Admiral? Mr. Scott?
I'd be grateful, Admiral, if you'd give the word.
May the wind be at our backs.
Fact number 1, Harve Bennett's first draft of the story was very different from what ended up on screen. Bennett had decided to be the sole writer of Star Trek III and wrote the screenplay in 6 weeks and turned in a script by September 1982, and it was titled Return to Genesis. Although the script would be vastly different from what ended up on screen. Early story ideas had Kirk being under house arrest, Sulu would steal the Enterprise and rescue Spock, and when Spock was found on Genesis, he would be a de-evolved Vulcan Neanderthal. In the next draft, Kirk would steal the Enterprise with Sulu, and they would be attacked by Romulans, and Kirk would crash the Enterprise while fighting them. And in this draft, Spock would be found to age along with the Genesis planet as if there was a mysterious connection between the two. And there was even an idea where we would meet Spock's long-lost brother, who would join the crew to look for Spock's body. He would not be Sybok, but this idea was also abandoned. A problem that Harve Bennett had was Genesis, because once you introduce a terraforming device to the world of Star Trek, you can't ignore it. There'd be no reason for hunger or overpopulation in the Star Trek universe. Every story problem could be resolved with Genesis. And fans were already asking what would happen if the Klingons got a hold of this doomsday weapon. Therefore, it became necessary for this movie to undo the concept of Project Genesis. Harve Bennett had the idea that Project Genesis was corrupted because David Marcus cheated and used a controversial substance called protomatter. And this was Bennett's way of erasing Genesis from Star Trek continuity. And that would mean that David Marcus would have to be punished for his sins. His character would be a Greek tragedy where he would have to die for interfering with Mother Nature. Nicholas Meyer was upset that they were resurrecting Spock, and he felt that the filmmakers were messing with the audience. They were putting the audience through an emotional ringer and then say, just kidding, he's going to be back in this movie. And therefore, he refused to have anything to do with Star Trek III. Fact number 2, Leonard Nimoy had to jump through hoops to direct Star Trek III. For the director, executives were considering James Goldstone, who was a Hollywood staple, and he directed some B-level Hollywood movies and had directed some Star Trek TV episodes, including the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, the one that got Star Trek approved. And so Paramount had to go to Leonard Nimoy to see if he even wanted to be in this movie, because they were ready to offer him anything to have him play Spock in this movie. And he reportedly told them, "You're damn right, and I want to direct that picture." Well, they were intrigued by the idea of Leonard Nimoy directing and returning, even though Spock was dead. Because Leonard Nimoy had wanted to direct an episode of Star Trek the original series, but was not given the opportunity. With Star Trek III, he saw himself as the solution for the Paramount executives. Because after all, very few people knew and understood Star Trek as well as Nimoy. And he had already directed an episode of T.J. Hooker and several episodes of Night Gallery. Well, they were intrigued with the idea of Leonard Nimoy directing and returning even though Spock was dead. So they gave him their blessing, and Nimoy went home and waited for the call from his agent, and apparently nobody called until weeks later. They finally scheduled a meeting with Michael Eisner, who was the head of Paramount Studios at the time, and Michael Eisner loved the idea, especially from a marketing point of view. Leonard Nimoy directing the return of Spock. It was a really cool concept, and it also created a little bit of mystery, like maybe Nimoy is just directing, and maybe Spock doesn't come back. So it was a great idea, they shook hands, and Nimoy thought it was a done deal. So he went home and waited for the call, and again, no call came for weeks. And finally, Nimoy actually called Michael Eisner himself and asked, "What's going on?" And when he said, I thought you liked the idea. And Michael Eisner said, "Look, I can't let you do it because everyone knows you hate Spock." And Nimoy insisted that he didn't hate Spock, but Michael Eisner said, "Come on, you even had it in your contract that Spock had to die." After all, Leonard Nimoy did not want to return for Star Trek II, so the directors had to entice him by agreeing to give him a great death scene. So of course there was a rumor in Hollywood and in the Star Trek fandom that Nimoy hated the character. And of course it should be noted that Nimoy had just written a book titled I Am Not Spock. Well, Nimoy insisted to Michael Eisner that he didn't hate Spock and that he actually loved Spock. He even asked Michael Eisner to go find the contract which should be stored in his building and see where in the contract that it says Spock must die. Well, whatever he said, it worked, and Michael Eisner was convinced and Nimoy got the job. However, Paramount had only one condition for Leonard Nimoy to return and direct, and that was that he had to return as Spock for the next movie, Star Trek IV. Now, Nimoy thought that the entire cast would be glad to have him at the helm, and he thought of it as one of our own is finally directing the film. However, that was not the case. The entire cast was very skeptical and basically had an attitude like, well, so what's this about? Fortunately, Nimoy was able to prove himself and slowly earn the cast's respect. Firmly in the director's chair, Leonard Nimoy went to work. Fact number 3, Leonard Nimoy proved to everyone that he understood Star Trek. Nimoy also wanted Star Trek III to be about friendship and the sacrifice one is willing to make for a friend. And he felt that the true Star Trek was not about the journey into space or fighting aliens, but rather about friendship between the Enterprise crew. And of course, this is explored to absolute perfection in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. And to Nimoy's brilliance, he gave every character his shining moment. Uhura gets to manhandle and humble a young cocky Starfleet officer. Scotty sabotages a pursuing ship. And the best scene of all is when Sulu gets to demonstrate his martial arts skills by throwing around a much larger security guard. When George Takei read this scene in the script, he didn't initially get it and thought that the guard calling him tiny was offensive. However, when he saw the film at the premiere and saw the reaction from the fans, it was that moment that he realized what a fan pleaser that scene was.
Don't call me tiny.
After all, Leonard Nimoy really had all of his castmates' interests at heart.
My friends.
And now with the hindsight of Star Trek III and Star Trek IV, we absolutely know how much he was looking out for his castmates. And the cast was impressed how much Leonard Nimoy let them experiment with their characters and all the open-minded input Nimoy had from the actors. And after completion of the movie, the cast and crew admitted that they had a great time, possibly more fun than they had in any previous episode of Star Trek, as well as the previous 2 movies. Everyone was happy that Nimoy directed Star Trek III. Fact number 4, the Klingon bird of prey was originally designed to be Romulan. In the original script, the Romulans were the villains, and a sleek new modern-looking Romulan bird of prey was designed by Leonard Nimoy himself. And Leonard had the idea of a modern version of the Romulan bird of prey as seen in the episode Balance of Terror. But Nimoy wanted to make it look more threatening and menacing, and had this idea to make it look like a bodybuilder flexing his shoulders and trapezius muscles. And when ILM asked him what the ship should look like, he raised both his arms, demonstrating the bodybuilder motion. And he also wanted the ship that could have moving wings based on whether it was cruising for attack or if it was flying at warp speed. Leonard Nimoy also had a vision of the bird with a long neck, like a bird swooping into the ocean just before it catches its prey. And he even drew the bird logo on the bottom of the ship as an homage to the Romulan ship in Balance of Terror. However, the studios insisted that the villains be changed to the Klingons, who were better known, and Harve, Bennett, and Leonard Nimoy agreed that they would be more cinematic. A studio poll by Paramount showed that fans really wanted to see the Klingons in this movie, and Harve Bennett agreed, and the villains were changed from Romulans to the Klingons. However, they didn't have a budget to recreate the Klingon ship, so instead they changed the script so that the Klingons are attacked by Romulans, and they board onto the Romulan ship. They kill the Romulans and take over their bird of prey. However, this scene was not filmed, and the movie was filmed with them just starting off on this Romulan ship. And of course, people remember that there was this treaty where Klingons and Romulans shared ships. And in fact, in an episode of the original series, when the Romulans attacked, they actually attacked with Klingon warbirds. So at that time, it was done to save money, and I guess it was done here to save money. So hence, the green bird of prey became a Klingon ship. And since then, the Klingon bird of prey has become iconic and has defined the look of the Klingons, really for the rest of the entire series up to now. It'll return in Star Trek V, it'll return in Star Trek VI, and even be in The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. The Romulans themselves would get a whole new, different, more rounded ships for the Next Generation TV show and beyond. Fact number 6, the Klingon language was created for this movie. Since the Klingons were the new villains for this movie, Nimoy wanted to flesh out a new Klingon language. And Nimoy and Bennett hired linguist Mark Okrand to create a full working Klingon language. Mark Okrand was a linguist who taught linguistics at the University of California in Santa Barbara and did a postdoctoral fellowship at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and was working for the National Captioning Institute. While working on the closed captioning for the Oscars awards show, Okrand ran into some producers who asked him to write the Vulcan language for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. They were so pleased that they hired him back to write the Klingon language for Star Trek III. And Mark Okrand was very excited about this job and took the job very seriously. He used the Klingon dialogue from Star Trek The Motion Picture, which was created by James Doohan, but he also referenced the original TV series. Now, in the original TV series, the Klingons all spoke English, but we did get Klingon names. Kang, Kor, Kolath, and Korax were the 4 Klingons named in the original series, so this gave Mark Okrand the idea to have the Klingon language have lots of hard Ks. And then he added phonetics used in Star Trek The Motion Picture. And the script itself said that the Klingons spoke in a guttural language, so he added a lot of guttural sounds like huh, and sh. And then Mark Okrand completely created a grammatical structure that was internally consistent and also intentionally very different from English. He created idioms and slangs, and in 1984, Okrand published a Klingon dictionary. And today, Klingon has grown into a fully realized language that people study and speak. In fact, more people speak Klingon than many of the world's languages. People around the world study it, books are published in Klingon, stage plays are performed in Klingon. So this fake language, created in 1984, has now become real. Fact number 7, the USS Excelsior was designed as a Japanese version of the Enterprise. Another new addition was a new ship called the USS Excelsior, which was introduced as a ship that's superior to the USS Enterprise in every way, because Nimoy and Bennett wanted to design the next generation of starships, a natural evolution from our favorite ship. And they went to the designers and asked for an Enterprise as if it were designed by the Japanese. And the designer came up with a sleek new Excelsior, and this ship became a fan favorite and would appear again in Star Trek IV and again in Star Trek VI and multiple times in the next generation. And when the Enterprise B is premiered in Star Trek Generations, it was the Excelsior class. And we also get a new space dock, which is supposed to be massive, and it was supposed to be 5 miles high and apparently visible from the Earth. And the model used to portray the new space dock was 6 feet high. Fact number 8, Commander Krug was almost portrayed by Edward James Olmos. For the role of Krug, Leonard Nimoy wanted Edward James Olmos, who blew everyone away with his audition. And at that time, Edward James Olmos was famous as the police chief on Miami Vice, and 2 decades later would define Admiral Adama in the 2005 hit television show Battlestar Galactica. Edward Olmos gave Krug a menacing vibe, but instilled him with gravitas. He was almost perfect except one factor. Olmos was shorter than most of the actors, and shorter than most of the Star Trek crew, especially William Shatner. Harve Bennett himself wanted Christopher Lloyd, who played it much broader and more operatic. However, Nimoy continued to champion Edward James Olmos, insisting he could use old Hollywood tricks like forced perspective to make Olmos look taller than Shatner. However, in the end, Christopher Lloyd's height and operatic performance won out over Edward James Olmos' intensity and gravitas. However, the Paramount producers were a little worried since Christopher Lloyd was basically known for his 5-year role as the stoner Reverend Jim on Taxi.
What does a yellow light mean? Slow down. Okay. What? Yellow light mean?
They thought of him as a goofy comedian and objected to his casting. However, Leonard Nimoy stood his ground and insisted that Lloyd get the part and fought any studio pushback. After all, Leonard Nimoy knew better than anybody what it was like to be unfairly typecast. Fortunately, everyone loved Lloyd's performance, and Commander Krug quickly became a fan favorite. Fact number 9, Leonard Nimoy based the Klingon culture on the Japanese samurai. Leonard Nimoy changed the culture of the Klingons from the expansionist seen in the original television series, which were clearly based on the Mongol warriors, and added a warrior's code similar to that of the samurai of feudal Japan. In this movie, Klingons are easily willing to sacrifice their own lives in the service of the mission, and this depiction resonated with the fans. It would be expanded upon in Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and now almost as many fans identify with the Klingon culture as they do with the Federation. Fact number 10, Kirstie Alley refused to return for Star Trek 3. One noticeable casting change was that of Lieutenant Saavik, played brilliantly by Kirstie Alley in Star Trek 2. And here she is replaced by Robin Curtis. And Curtis would play a different kind of Saavik. Kirstie Alley Saavik was supposed to be half Vulcan and half Romulan, and the way Alley played Saavik, you can see the passionate Vulcan bubbling underneath. Robin Curtis played Saavik as a full Vulcan, and fans have speculated that being directed by Leonard Nimoy would be likely to Vulcanize Saavik rather than the other way around. And it was no secret that Alley did not have a good time on the set of Star Trek II. However, Kirstie Alley has said in later interviews that she actually wanted to return, but the salary they offered her for Star Trek III was actually less than that of Star Trek II, and Alley felt that it was insultingly low and had to turn down the offer. A few years later, Kirstie Alley would nab the role of Rebecca Howe on the hit TV sitcom Cheers, and as a protagonist in the Look Who's Talking franchise, and this would launch her career into the stratosphere. And there you have it, 10 fascinating, mind-blowing facts about Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. But don't feel quite satisfied? Feel there's much more facts to talk about? Well, tune in next week where we're going to have 10 more facts about Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.